going to get us started here today. We are very happy to have you with us today. Glad you can join us. And my name is Dan Behrens. I am the co-host for this webinar. I'm an independent consultant and senior fellow at CACE, the Center for the Advancement of Christian Education, the sponsor of this webinar today. So this is part two of our two-part webinar series, and then we have also made, we also have available on the CACE blog a four-part series on the topic of inclusion. So I hope you've already been able to read those four posts on this topic, and to access those you can go to the CACE.org website. So a few words about our interactivity, how that will work today. I'm going to have you and our panelists muted for the time being, and that will allow you to listen, not worry about any noises from your end being broadcast. And this will allow for a clearer broadcast as well. So please feel free to use our chat box here and ask questions, jot them down throughout the presentation. We'll be mentioning those to our panelists as well to respond to, and we'll certainly double check that at the end of our broadcast as well during that discussion segment. So this webinar will be recorded and will be available as well on the CACE website in a couple of days after our time together here today. So I would like to now introduce my co-host and our two panelists to you at this time. We have with us today as co-host Elizabeth Lucas Dombrowski, who is the Executive Director of the CLC Network. And Elizabeth, I'd like to have you just explain a little bit about CLC Network, if you would, please.
Sure thing, Dan. We work with schools and churches across the country to help them support students at all levels of ability, from those with ADHD or anxiety or behavioral stuff, all the way up to those with cognitive impairments or medically fragile. We're a nonprofit, and so our mission is to cultivate inclusive communities, and we see all of your schools as part of that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We're also happy to have with us today two practitioners to bring their unique perspective from the school level. We're happy to have Brian Cucci, who is the administrator for Allendale Christian School in Allendale, Michigan. And also Carolyn Beal, who's the educational support program director at Annapolis Area Christian Schools in Annapolis, Maryland. So welcome to both of you. You'll be hearing from them later on in our webinar. So just catching up, some of you might not have been on our first webinar or had opportunity to read the blog posts. We feel that inclusive education in Christian schools is a very unique opportunity for three specific aspects, and those are further delineated in our blog posts. But really, let's think about these 3 points for a minute here. When we think about our mission in Christian schools, it should be a very distinctive one. We exist to bring something very unique to students, and that is helping students know and live the truth of Jesus Christ. So when we think about our Christian schools, we're really trying to build a picture of beauty, a beautiful kids made in God's image, a beautiful work that's being done, beautiful staff, and parents caring deeply for these kids. And so this picture of beauty, is it something that is copied, or is it deeply biblical in your school? Sometimes we copy practices or ideas that are not specifically biblical, and we certainly encourage you to link what we're doing with the biblical stance, and we'll do that again today in our webinar. Secondly, do we really see shalom or flourishing of each individual student as a central task of Christian school? I've been challenging schools the past several years to set flourishing as an outcome for students in Christian education, as opposed to copying success models that are out there in other schools. It's not about individual success. It's about each individual flourishing and growing into what God intends them to be. So in that sense, inclusion represents a really countercultural approach that is biblically based, I think. And so in summary, these three reasons, it's a stand for community and reaching out to all people as Jesus did. It's a way that we can more fully realize the mission of our schools and institutions. It's also making clear our values. It's about valuing each image bearer as opposed to sorting and awarding and buying into that other narrative that is very individualistic. So focusing on the flourishing of all students is a very worthy goal for us. And to further update us, Elizabeth, perhaps you could mention some of the things that we talked about in our last conversation, in our last webinar.
Sure. Some of the things we talked about were the biblical themes, particularly behind this idea and the vision and the mission and the importance of linking everything that we're doing in our schools, particularly when we're serving students of varying levels of need, back to our missions as schools and why we're doing it. So we talked a lot about developing that narrative of why we do what we do. And that, I can't say that enough because it's so important for all of us to continue to talk about and to continue to express in words that are unique to one school or the other or any community where that resonates. When we talk about inclusion in a Christian school, we focus on two main principles, and those are connected to the biblical themes, of course. But it's always helpful to define what we mean by inclusion. And we tried to do that in some of our blog posts. So I do hope that you'll look at those blog posts that Dan and I published on the CACE blog. But the first principle out of the two is that students with disabilities belong in our schools and in our general education classroom. And so for that sense, we want to do everything we can to say to these students, you belong, that you are a body of Christ and that you are important to us as a community. And so they should contribute to their age-appropriate class as a whole and really feel like they're part of that class and not part of a special education program. The second principle that of the inclusion of the type that we are talking about is that social inclusion has to be intentionally cultivated. To do that, we are working with students and their peers to equip everyone with the information and the lenses to understand each other as children of God and to be able to translate any different sort of behaviors into a common language and acceptance. Because our ultimate goal then is to form that community together and recognize our interdependence as followers of Christ and our mutuality as children of God. So we're always bringing it back to that and trying to do so in everything that we do. And I have this big wad of money here because that's often one of the big questions that we get. And certainly one of the questions we got in our last webinar. So we try to think of educational supports as being there for every student. So one of the things that we are going to talk about today is the ways that inclusive education changes education for every student at your school and really changes the system of how we look at kids and how we set up our schools. So it's not just about those who are struggling and that they should pay more necessarily, but to say that every kid needs some form of this support in order to be educated as children of God in this community. So then we, talk a lot about paying for it with Title IIA funds, with fundraising strategies, with budgeting, but overall we want this to be a place of belonging as much as possible.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Those pieces are really, those practical pieces are really vital to the idea of inclusion in our schools. I want to dip back just a little bit into, again, looking at the individual and the idea of the included individual benefiting, but more than that, the idea that that person in our community helps all of us become more human. So this slide title is really the name of a book by Jean Vanier. If you're not familiar with him, I have his book up there. He was a pioneer in his work with people with developmental disabilities. He established a network of over 100 communities in 30 countries. If you've heard of the name Henry Nouwen, Henry was one of the people who worked at one of those communities set up by Vanier. Those of you who know me well know that I can hardly get through a presentation without recommending multiple books, so I've limited myself to a couple here, but I do highly recommend this book. If you're thinking about inclusion in your schools, or if you're trying to deepen the commitment to inclusion. And I absolutely love this quote. It says, how do we become the kind of people, the kind of community that helps all of us become more fully what we were created to be, more engaged with the world in its variety and complexity, more deeply embedded in relationship and mutual dependence, more truly free? So the focus of his work is really helping us in understanding our own humanity, and then being open and looking at others with the eyes of respect as image bearers. Just one more quote out of this book. He says, maturity comes through working with others, through dialogue, and through a sense of belonging and searching together. And when I think about not only what I wanted for our daughters, but my wife and my daughters, but when I think about all children, isn't that really what we want? We want them to belong, to understand themselves, be in harmony with themselves, with others, with God, with creation. And I thought it was really interesting in the book. He says there are 7 aspects of love to transform the lonely heart. And each of us has a lonely heart. He says, first of all, to reveal, to understand, to communicate, to celebrate, to empower, to be in communion with one another, and to forgive. And so inclusive education helps all of our students become more human and understanding themselves and others better. My second book recommendation is the book by John Swenton here, and a quote from his book. I think in Christian education, we absolutely want to move towards becoming shalom-focused communities. And this is an example of a multiply handicapped student. He says, named Arthur, and he says, Arthur has taught those around not only what love means, but what love looks like, not towards the cultural norms of competency, efficiency, production, competition. Rather, he has revealed a different way of being in the world and valuing human life. And again, so those competing values that we're trying to teach our kids, the differences between, not just accepting that cultural narrative. He goes on to say that to truly be with Arthur, one needs to be slow, kind, generous, gentle, timeful, and self-controlled. Disciples who are impatient, frenetic, anxious, or easily frustrated will struggle to be with Arthur, but in that struggle will find new aspects of themselves. And so I thought it was a wonderful thing for us to think about in terms of how to become that kind of community that has growth happening at so many different levels. So how do we practically do this? I'm going to turn back to Elizabeth and have her help us explore those practicalities along with our panelists.
Thanks, Dan. Those are beautiful excerpts from those books. I appreciate that. The picture you're looking at now is a way of thinking about inclusive education as a complete system. And what I hope to do by showing this slide is to demonstrate how inclusive education and resource supports can work together to ensure every student is learning, and how that fits into an overall structure in school contexts. So this is actually from Kansas. The state of Kansas has a multi-tiered system of support website that's referenced at the bottom there. And this is kind of their logo thing. And we find this a helpful way to think about not only response to intervention, but multi-tiered systems of support and how kids qualify and all of these different pieces. So we want to make sure that instruction, you'll see on the top left there by the triangle, right? So the middle of the triangle is that those different tiers of support. So you have all of your students, some of your students in tier 2, a few students in tier 3, and there's all kinds of pathways throughout there as well. But the instruction piece is where we kind of focus on differentiating instruction and focusing on student learning, formative assessments, assessing learning, and our strategies of engagements in schools. And all of that works in then to the different tiers of RTI. Curriculum then is where we're talking about evidence-based materials and methods of instruction. The assessment piece is all of the different screeners that are available, the assessments for learning, things that we do in the classroom and formal and informal kind of assessments. Professional development then starts this last circle around to kind of show how we continually improve these pieces so that it reaches our instruction and our educations reach every student. So the professional learning communities might be part of that. Empowering culture is looking, from our perspective as a Christian schools, and we can take these public school models and really apply them in our own context. And I think that's a great freedom that we can take advantage of, right? So we can look at kids and understand what's going on with our students through lenses of, that they are a child of God, that they have strengths and weaknesses, that they have always something to contribute to our communities. And not always, receiving something. So this and what we use as a neurodevelopmental framework gives us a place to start and some common ground to move forward. But the idea here, and what I hope you can take away from this slide, is that all of these pieces, all of these parts of your school, then wrap around your students as a whole. So not just academically, but also socially, emotionally, and in their faith development, and that we don't have to create boxes out of any of this, but we can help understand each other better and understand each other under these lenses and guidance as children of God. So all that is to say that there are lots of ways that this works, and there are lots of ways that inclusive education then impacts your school. So the role of the educational support services department, director, coordinator, teacher, whatever you want to title it, has a number of roles. And when these first kind of 4 pieces are balanced with teaching and paraprofessional staff and administration duties, then the ESS teacher is able to advocate for students through these roles, because that's just always necessary. So the first 4 roles then are support services teachers, providing pullouts when necessary. The second one then is consulting to your general education staff. And that really speaks to the sense of belonging for students with disabilities to belong in the general education environment. So the 3rd grade teacher, so the ESS person is then consulting with that 3rd grade teacher to help provide differentiations or accommodations in the classroom as much as possible before we move to those pullouts. The 3rd of student diagnostician is, pretty self-explanatory in terms of helping determine what's going on with a student and what some next steps might be. And then the 4th as para-teacher supervisor is managing a team of people who might be providing supports as necessary and helping to determine when those supports are appropriate and when they might not be, and helping to facilitate, sometimes co-teaching in the classroom.
Thanks, Elizabeth. As a curriculum director, former curriculum director, as well as building principal, and someone who works a lot with schools on mapping today, I couldn't resist talking a little bit about what kinds of instructional approaches lend themselves to an inclusive approach. And if some of you are doing these things already, I'd love to talk more with you. I really see deeper learning, or we can goes by many different specific names. Sometimes we might call it project-based learning, as a way of approaching a pedagogical approach with inclusive students that really benefits mainstream students in three ways, and benefits inclusive students as well. So project-based, of course, uses cooperative learning settings, increases problem-solving skills, and increases students' self-directed learning skills. And you see the endorsement here of a Buck Institute faculty member saying this is a great vehicle for meaningful inclusion because of the fact that of its elements. And if you go to my blog post on this, the fourth one, you can see what those elements are, and teaching practices also are hyperlinked. But they're all geared toward creating the kind of engaging and dynamic learning environment that also is very appropriate for kids with a wide range of disabilities. A lot of energy, enthusiasm, excitement, and it's a very natural way that I would suggest you approach this from an instructional standpoint. Let's turn to our practitioners now for some specific questions and answers that we've posed to them, and we'll be incorporating yours as well. And so first, let's hear from Brian. And Brian, I'm glad to have you with us today. Appreciate your being with us. And maybe if you could start off by saying why inclusion at your school? What caused that movement at your school?
Sure, thanks, Dan. You know, one of the things that I strongly believe in as a school, we have a mission statement and vision statements, and I think that they have to absolutely drive what you do. And when you look at both our mission statement and our vision statement, we talk about what we want for students. And one thing I noticed right away is it didn't say we want this for average or typical. There wasn't an adjective before students, and so looks to me like that would mean all students. So that way we're going to put resources into whatever we can do to help all students. You know, and our mission statement talks about equipping them academically, spiritually, and socially. And so we want to make sure that we're doing that for students across the spectrum.
Elizabeth?
Thanks, Brian. Can you talk a little bit about how you communicate your school's commitment to support services, and how those services work at Allendale Christian, and how that's been received by your community as well?
Sure, and you know, one thing, I've been here for 5 years, so I would say the way we communicate, we do communicate that in writing, we communicate it verbally, but we also communicate it with our actions and the decisions we make. One of the first things I did when we really made a move to push for inclusion at ACS, actually the very first thing I did was called up CLC. We had ended our relationship at one point, and I didn't quite understand that, so I called CLC and said, let's get rolling again. And so that started the process. But I send a letter home to our parents, and I share a passage from Matthew 19 where it talks about Jesus calling the little children to come to him. And I really point out that Jesus in that also didn't specify specifically which kids. He just said, let the children come. And so I share to parents that means all children. All children are part of the body of Christ. They belong regardless of ability or disability. And so we also follow up with parents in that same letter, and we request that they help their student or their child understand that everyone's going to have abilities, everyone's going to have difficulties, some more visible than others, but we ask them to model what grace is and what acceptance is, and we ask them to model celebration of each other. So that is to parents. With our staff, we do so in writing, we do so in the way we talk. It just becomes a part of our culture. There's no other way that we would want to have it done. And so staff get on board, and then that is the way they communicate with parents. And then finally, it's through our decisions. I started back in 2012. I've been principal for 5 years. I was just looking at the numbers today. Our paraprofessional staff has increased the financial aspect 500%. Our support services lead teacher was a 60% employee when I started. They are now 100%. And our commitment to CLC and working with CLC when I started was 0. And now we have a relationship with CLC. So when you look at that, enrollment's gone up 15%, but the other things have gone up 500%, 40%. So what we're doing shows our commitment.
Thank you for doing that. What has been some of the feedback that you've gotten on those actions?
To tell you the truth, it goes back to a story when I first started here. As we were pushing for more inclusion, there was a family that we didn't have the resources to help out because we weren't on board and completely committed. And when we lost that family, that was extremely difficult to take. And so to me, that was a mindset shift at that point. And I can tell you that I've had nobody ask, why are we doing what we're doing? If you are a principal at a school and you have something in your line item or your budget that goes up 500%, I'm guessing a lot of people would ask a lot of questions like, why on earth would you be doing that? And I had a board member this year say, let's keep cranking that up because that's an important line item. And that to me shows the culture that's happening, and nobody questions it because they know exactly why we're doing it.
That's quite a testimony. 500%. What ways has that focus and that increased resourcing on students with higher needs then impacted your approaches to education for all students?
Sure, that's a great question. When you increase your paraprofessional budget by 500%, that does get spread out. I mean, having more paraprofessionals in the building helps every student, and frankly, helps your teachers as well. It shows them that you're committed to supporting them, and in turn, I think that performance can increase because when you're being supported and the school's looking out for you, I think that sometimes you put even a little bit more into it. And I think a lot of the students, who you might label as gifted now have more resources because we've put into that. And the general classroom, every student is getting more face time with paraprofessionals, and putting more into CLC helps us because we can ask questions about kids with any abilities. And I think it's even changing the way we look at just individual students. I mean, I think we're just more aware in general. So, when you think of inclusion, you don't think of maybe the kid with a peanut allergy, but it's just helping us look at all students across the spectrum and what's going to be best to help them.
Thanks, Brian. If you don't mind, I'd like to draw out a little bit of that, of what you said about paraprofessionals. You assigned paraprofessionals throughout the building for specific students, I'm guessing, but then they're working with the whole classroom. So can you talk a little bit about how you've managed that shift?
Well, my support services lead teacher, who was 60% and is now 100%, has really helped with that shift because honestly, I've worked to empower her to help with scheduling because I've got a lot going on too. And so I think that that's helped. She's been able to manage that well. But yeah, we try to do a lot of push-ins. And so when you have a push-in and the paraprofessionals are working with students who may need some extra individual attention. That doesn't always happen the full period, so suddenly they're available to move around and help answer questions, support the teacher. We do some pull-out stuff as well, which obviously, is going to be more small group, but they're in the building. And so we get to move them about where we need them, and we make sure, obviously, we hit the needs that are out there, and then there's plenty of time available after that to work with others.
Thank you. Dan, you can step in at any point, but I'd like to address the question that Kathy asked. How do we help traditional mainstream students accept and embrace the students with challenges who are included in classes? And I'd love to hear from you, Brian, on how you have done that.
Say that one more time, sorry.
She asks, how do we help traditional, students in our classrooms accept and embrace the students with challenges who are included in classes?
Yeah, that's awesome. What we did learn about right away was communication is so important. So actually, we've had one of our CLC consultants come in and meet with a class and do an activity with that class to specifically talk about how everyone has pretty amazing abilities and some people have struggles, and choose different examples that the students would understand. And then we were able to celebrate one of the kids in the class and tell them that the student may interact or learn in a different way, and that's why it's so cool. And we've had, for example, a kid with he would bump against someone looking for some touch, and she would explain to them that is something that is for security, so it's not a negative thing. And it's interesting, then the kids didn't get mad. They started to understand that was something that kid was doing because there was a need, and so their patience and grace increased. And so I think, communication for kids and parents is the biggest way to do that, because if we don't explain it, we can't really expect them just to pick it up on their own.
Thanks, Brian. And we've done that with a lot of different situations, and just being able to talk about how everyone might learn differently, it can be a really helpful conversation, and how everyone might have different sensory processing can be a really helpful conversation, particularly when you don't have a diagnosis or a clear explanation. Just that basic honoring of everyone's differences can be very helpful. Is there anything else you want to add right now, Brian, or shall we go to Carolyn?
Yeah, we can move to Carolyn. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much. So Carolyn, thanks so much for joining us today. And I'm hoping that you can start to talk about the various initiatives that you're working on at Annapolis Area Christian, and the different ways that you're helping to ensure that all kids learn.
Sure. Thanks. It's so great to be here and be part of this conversation. I have only been here at AACS. This is my second year, but when our school started to look at what does inclusion mean and how do we do that better, the first step was working with CLC, and I think we've heard that already, but I think CLC is so helpful in helping look at the big picture. They came in and did a site study and helped us see things that were going really well, things that maybe we needed some support with, or things that we could do better. And when I got here, I was hired as the elementary resource teacher, and when I got here, they had already set up universal screening for kids. They had gotten a reading intervention program, and so they built reading intervention into kindergarten through second grade, really to focus on those early learners. And what a great thing. The teachers just knew this is part of our schedule. By the time I got here, they had 2 of us doing those groups. And so once kids made growth with that reading intervention program, then we were able to be flexible with needs of kids and work in the classrooms. Sometimes we pulled other kids. And I think just using those universal screeners was very helpful to help teachers and help our staff get to know the needs of kids and really look at kids individually. And so it started with most of the things that we've been working on in the last couple of years are really whole school, looking at, what does our instruction look like? What is our curriculum from K to 12? Where, what do we do really well? What can we change? And then how do we help those kids that learn differently? And I think one of the things they did last year was hire someone who could help us with that curriculum. Look, pre-K to 12, what pieces are we missing? Are we doing 21st century learning? Are we teaching in a way that all kids can learn? And then I feel like part of my role was to help be in classrooms, and there were lots and lots of kids already that learned differently, and that teachers wanted to know they love these kids and they see them as part of the body of Christ, and they love these families that have been here for years and years and years, and so they want to know how to help these kids, and so putting things in place to help them look at kids individually, but then also looking at the bigger picture and saying, how do we have good instruction that's solid and a curriculum that flows and isn't missing big chunks as we go from grade level to grade level or campus to campus. And so I think just looking at that good instruction this year, we've done some more professional development we even had our ed support staff involved in a professional development last week, looking at how do we use learning targets to help be really specific about our learning with kids, and creating a culture of learning so that we're not up here just teaching these things, but we're getting kids involved. And all of those things are broad picture things, but I think they've helped our staff and our teachers to really look individually at kids as well. So those are kind of the big picture things. With our ed support staff, we've really looked at, again, pre-K to 12, how are kids going to qualify for service once they've had that early intervention, and maybe they still need support. What is that going to look like? How will they qualify for that? And how are we going to use our staff? Each campus, we go pre-K to 12, we have 4 campuses, and each campus was doing some really good things already with kids, and but being able to meet together and communicate with our ed support staff, and then also across our campuses, and then also within our campuses, I think has helped us learn from each other, and then really focus on a consistent program so that the same things are happening all the way through. And I think that's helped with the communication process as well, as parents come in and as we bring other kids in that have higher needs. It helps teachers to know what's happened before and what's going to happen when they get to the next campus, or what kinds of supports are there. So I think that communication is key across campuses and within our campuses with our ed support team. And then one of the other things that we really pushed last year and this year was to have time for teachers to talk with each other about students and about their specific needs. And so our ed support staff has started to facilitate some of those meetings. And it's been a good time that sometimes those things aren't built into our school day. And so to have that time to say, this is, let's look at our data, look at what information we have about the student and what else can we try, and let's get some other people at the table to do that. So that communication piece, and then really looking pre-K to 12, what are we doing? What are our services going to look like has been really good. So we're kind of in the stage we're looking for that consistent thing, K to 12, and then just communicating.
Thank you, Gail. You're working on a lot of big picture stuff right now, right? So are there any specific stories out of that big picture stuff and how that's impacted specific students that you might be willing to share?
I think there have been a couple where one in particular, the family felt like every year they had to go to the school and say, this is who my student is, this is how they learn. These are the things that have worked for them in the past. And this year when they came to school, the teachers had already set up a meeting with them and said, oh, we see that these are some strengths that we're excited about your student. We've heard from the other teachers, and what else can you tell us about your child? But just that communication of having that, knowing that the teachers are paying attention and communicating from year to year, I think just helped the parents they felt very much more comfortable in having their kid there. They didn't feel like they were the only advocate. They felt like they were part of the body of Christ at this school. So I think that's one story, and there've been a couple like that.
Hooray! That's really cool to hear about. So can you think of like the most impactful thing that you have done in your role that has impacted the whole school?
I think I sometimes feel like I'm the cheerleader for our ed support team. They have lots of great skills, and their staffs at each campus really trust them and lean on them for practical strategies to meet the needs of kids. And so I think encouraging them to step into those conversations with teachers, but also with parents and administrators. And then I think just that we've been I meet with them every week with the middle school and with the high school. And then our communication of talking about what's happening at each campus, because there are great things happening, but to be able to learn from each other has been amazing. So I think just that communication and all of the teachers, the classroom teachers, have been excited about being able to have set aside time with those ed support team to talk about kids, and those team members can go into the classroom and they're modeling some really good instruction. And so I think just communication and just working through how do we learn from each other? How do we learn from our students too?
Thank you, Carolyn. Would you like to respond to the same question that Brian responded to in terms of how do we help traditionally included students accept and embrace the students with challenges who are in the classroom?
Sure. I think one way is just by modeling that we care about kids, we love kids, we are, and that includes all kids. Our mission statement also says that we engage in an education of excellence, and that is not just for certain students. And so helping modeling that with the students and helping them all having class conversations about the fact that we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, and talking specifically about those sometimes. And there are kids that are going to want to share those, and there are kids that aren't, but bringing that to the forefront and being willing to talk about that. Sometimes I've had parents come in and talk about this is who my kid is, and they want to share some really cool things about themselves, and helping parents advocate for their kids. And then also so modeling that we're all about the body of Christ, and talking and creating a culture where kids are willing to talk about things that are hard for them and willing to talk about things that they're really good at, and just see how they fit in the body of Christ, and that we need each other. And a lot of times when we start to have those conversations with kids, the other kids who maybe are more typical learners will say, oh yeah, I have a hard time with that, and he's really good at this, and she does a great job at this. And so I think kids are, especially when they're younger, but even as they move into middle school and high school, are good about sharing that with each other if we help to create that culture for them, that it's okay to talk about those things.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Do you have anything else that you want to add at this point?
Nope, I think I'm good. Thanks.
All right. Thank you both, to you and Carolyn. We consider it an honor and a blessing to be able to be your cheerleaders as well. So for all the good that you are doing. I'll hand it back to Dan at this point.
Right, thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Brian. Tremendous job. Participants, it's your turn to really dive in here. Use the chat board. Get your question asked that you've been wondering. There's not such a thing as a silly question. So we're looking for your questions on that chat site. I just got really excited during that time of listening, first to Brian, to the vision that he's cast, to the firmness that he is committed to it, and that comes across, I'm sure, in conversations, and to his board. And I appreciate the vision that he's casting with his board, and getting board members advocating and in line with, not in line, on board, I guess, but with that vision. And then really pointing out the ways that increase in staff can benefit so many kids. And Carolyn, I just really appreciated the comprehensive way that you're bringing the whole system together and getting people talking, getting people communicating, and really the idea that creating that community not only benefits kids with identified needs, but unidentified needs. It creates a community for parents and for kids where we can talk about things that are difficult or that are lonely, that are hard. And what a feeling of belonging and acceptance and shalom that is, that you're creating at both of your schools. So just very excited to have you with us today and to share with us. We do have a question from Misty, and she's asking here, Brian, is your school a discipleship school or evangelical in nature? And I'm assuming here in mission. She says, this shift is a huge culture shock for our existing families. Board members are about 50% in agreement. It's a must to make this shift. There's no cookie cutter kid as some parents expect. I'm very interested in continuing to seek more education in this area as the VP, vice principal at a small school in Texas. Brian, do you want to respond to that, please?
I think by enrollment standards at this point, we would be a covenant school, I suppose is the word that is used. We're making some shift in our board as we discuss this to open this up a little bit more. I think we've let up a little bit on those standards to make sure that we get kids in that maybe in the past wouldn't have been, because we believe that every kid needs Jesus. And so, but I don't know that that's really tied too much yet to our conversation about inclusion, but I can see where the question, that's a great one, but it's never really been brought up in those terms. Just because I focus on every kid being a part of the kingdom and the body, and the board's been very supportive of that.
Yeah, Misty, please feel free to contact Brian or Carolyn. I'm sure they would welcome that. If you didn't catch their email, we can go back to that as well. But I'm sure they'd be happy to continue the conversation with you. Here's another question from Kathy. She says, for older students, do you ever have low-tech type of programs available?
I can answer that from a broad perspective, as in terms of what we see with the high schools that we work with. We do encourage at the high school age, working with the public school district to sometimes utilize the vocational programs that are available, or the occupational programs that are available. We generally follow a rule of thirds, right? For students with significant cognitive impairments or modified curriculums, that a third is academic, a third might be social or life skills, and then a third might be vocational skills. So certainly thinking about that, but we are blessed here in Michigan that if students receive an alternative diploma, or not a diploma, rather a certificate of completion, they can be eligible for transition programs through the public school until age 26. And that is fairly rare, but at least we are working with the counties and the state programs to make sure that students are able to transition into those programs when they leave our schools, should that be a necessity. I hope that answers your question, Kathy. But Carolyn, you have a high school. I'm not sure how much you've explored that yet.
We do have a high school. That conversation keeps coming up. Right now we don't have a connection. with anywhere like that, but we have started trying to figure out if we could connect with our public schools to do that, because we feel like there is a need there.
Absolutely.
Other questions that you might have? We'll leave the chat board open. We'll just start wrapping up because we are getting near the end of our time here. We thank you for staying with us. Well, I want to, Elizabeth and I want to share a few resources here with you, and I bolded the top one because, not because she asked me to do it, but just because I think it's such an outstanding resource. Be sure to download this if you have not seen this before. I think it was referenced in one of Elizabeth's blog posts as well, but this is really an outstanding piece of work. The services standard, and Elizabeth, maybe if you could just address that briefly, that would be helpful. But I recommend that you download that. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thanks for the endorsement, Dan. This document was developed over the summer, last summer, to stand alongside accreditation processes that already exist. And so you can get an endorsement in Christian school education services through a couple of different accrediting agencies, and I encourage you to ask your accreditors about that, and I can help you too. But the document itself involves a self-assessment tool that we hope is helpful for a broad range of schools, just to kind of get a sense of what this can look like and what areas you might need to focus on. The indicators are grouped into 3 general categories, which is a commitment in the beginning stage of what do your admissions policies look like, how do you have this conversation, and how is it linked back to your mission. To a collaboration section of indicators. You heard Carolyn talk about the importance of that collaboration time and the importance of structuring that into your days. And then the final set of indicators is on community, and so that is meant to show how that commitment and collaboration have really infiltrated everyone in your community, so that everyone is keeping each other accountable to the mission and to the biblical foundations, and the way that is demonstrating itself in the actions and activities of your community. So that's what that one is.
Thanks, Elizabeth. While we're on this page, I just want to really endorse a couple other things here. I'm not a paid endorser. This is just from my heart. Barb Newman there, whose books are listed, is an outstanding resource. She's been part of CLC for many years, and she's also a great resource to churches who are seeking to do inclusive education in the church setting. So I highly recommend her books, and her services also are available through CLC. And then if you get an opportunity, be sure to check out that video at the bottom there, including Isaac. It's very, very powerful, and I think it if a picture is worth 1,000 words, the video is worth, I guess, 10,000 or 1,000,000. After you've looked at that, I'm sure you'll be impressed. Elizabeth, one more question, maybe mostly for you and for our panelists here, but what specific kinds of professional developments have you done with teachers to help them understand disabilities? And I guess where is that in the process? That's from Alyssa. Thank you, Alyssa, for asking that question.
Thanks, Alyssa. There are a couple of different ways you can think about that professional development that you mentioned. You can think about in terms of how do we understand kids, right? Just in general, how do we understand what's going on? And for that, we really do a lot of neurodevelopmental constructs, 8 different neurodevelopmental constructs developed through all kinds of minds. So we start from there as a way of developing a common language for understanding kids and for describing kids. We go through a process of what do we see, what do we think, and what do we do. And so we find the neurodevelopmental constructs as a helpful way to think about what's going on in the classroom and in this student's life. We then do offer professional development as well on specific disabilities that are going on. But so often, as Barb Newman says, if you know one student with autism, you know one student with autism, right? Because every student is going to be very different. So we do some of that just to understand some of the symptoms and some of what the medical community knows about different disabilities at this point. But so often it's very difficult to fit kids into any specific descriptor or diagnosis like that. The diagnosis is another way to describe a kid. So we really want to talk about the kid as a whole. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to put Elizabeth's email address up here, or at least CLC Network. And Melissa, if you've got further questions related to that, please be sure to get in contact with her. We mentioned the blog series. This is the URL for the blog series. CLC's website, my website. We're very grateful you've taken time out of your busy day to be a part of this discussion and webinar today. If you want to share this with others, it will be on the CACE.org website as well. And yes, Elizabeth.
I do want to add another little plug. We do have a conference coming up August 3 and 4 in Chicago, in Palos Heights, Illinois. Beyond Special Education, Inclusion in this Christian School. So we'll be going through a day and a half worth of some of the foundational approaches that we use to understand students at that time, and that is a conference in partnership with Christian Schools International. So you'll see that on our website. I just wanted to make another plug for it.
Kathy, Elizabeth, Kathy asks, will there be a CEU certificate available for that course, I guess, or maybe for this webinar? I don't think for this webinar, but that's something maybe we should explore in the future. Any CEUs for that course, do you know?
It depends on the state that you're coming from, and we're happy to look into it if that's a deciding factor for you to come. Just give me a call or an email, and I'll be able to let you know with a few more details.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to our panelists, Brian and Carolyn.
Hey, Dan.
Today. And Brian, last comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say quickly, I know that Becky Tubergen at CLC has used the letter that I wrote about inclusion and given it to a few schools that were looking at some things. I don't claim it to be amazing, but if anyone wants to have that sent to them, I believe in the chat I put my email, so they're welcome to ask me and I will send it. I don't have a trademark on it or anything, so if people would love to use it, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Brian. That's a great letter.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. Thanks for sharing your resources. All right, anyone else? Otherwise, thank you again for your participation today, and this will end our webinar.